Hey there, Noel here, and I wanted to talk about something that sounds, well, kind of crazy. There's this theory going around online, maybe you've heard about it, that the US government is planning to erase its $37 trillion national debt by using, wait for it, crypto. Yeah, as in stablecoins, digital dollars, even a full-on crypto reset. Some folks are saying they'll move the debt into the blockchain or into some kind of crypto cloud. And just like that, poof, the debt's gone. At first I thought this had to be one of those internet rumors, but then I watched a video from Andrew Jick, and to his credit, he actually explained it in a way that made you stop and think. That's when I realized I needed to make a video about this. Because here's the deal. This theory works because it sounds complex. It throws around crypto buzzwords and vague technical jargon, and that's what makes it feel believable to some. But look, as an accounting professional and as someone who bought Bitcoin in 2015, but sold it a year later, and that's another story, I think it's time to slow things down and look at this with a little common sense. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through what this crypto debt reset theory really is, where it came from, what parts, if any, might hold some truth, and why most of it just doesn't add up in my humble opinion. I'm going to keep it simple, just the facts, let's get to it. What's the theory and where did it come from? Alright, so let's back up for a second and talk about what this theory actually is and where it came from. It started at an economic forum in Russia, of all places. One of Putin's top advisors made this bold claim that the United States is getting ready to move its $37 trillion national debt into something called the crypto cloud. And supposedly, they're going to use stablecoins and digital assets to somehow devalue the $1 trillion national debt, maybe even make it disappear. Now I know that sounds super vague, and that's because it is. But then the idea started to spread. A few big crypto influencers jumped on it, including Michael Saylor, the CEO of MicroStrategy, or Strategy as it's now called. He's been pretty vocal, even saying America should sell off its gold and buy Bitcoin instead. Basically use crypto to recapitalize the country and take power away from our economic rivals. From there, YouTube and TikTok exploded with videos claiming the US is about to reset the whole system using crypto and just wipe out the debt. That's the story, but let's pause for a second. Like Andrew Jick said in his video, just because a theory uses real financial terms doesn't mean it's true. I mean, it might sound smart, it might sound technical, and it throws around just enough details to feel legit. And that's exactly why so many people fall for it. There's an old saying, if you can't dazzle them with details, baffle them with bullshit. And that's exactly what this does in my opinion. It takes real ideas like inflation, stablecoins, and crypto, and twists them into something that doesn't quite make much sense once you stop and analyze it. What's actually possible and what's not? All right, let's slow things down and unpack this. Can the US actually wipe out its debt using cryptocurrencies? Or are people just getting lost in a mess of complicated terms? Let's start with the big one, debt. When people talk about the US national debt, they're talking mostly about treasury, bills, notes, and bonds. Money the government has borrowed from investors, from other countries, and even from everyday Americans in exchange for interest income. That's not just some digital file you can drag and drop onto the blockchain. It's a legal contract with real consequences if you don't pay it back. You can't just move it over to crypto and say, all right, we're good now. That's not how it works. So where's the confusion coming from? Now here's where it gets interesting, and this is where Andrew Jick makes a great point. The US can't just erase its national debt with crypto, but it can reduce the real burden of that debt over time. And it does that with something you already know about, inflation. Let me break it down as simply as I can. Let's say I borrow $100 from you. A year or two goes by and I pay you back the same $100. But during that time, prices went up. Groceries, gas, rent, all more expensive. So yeah, later you get your $100 back, but it doesn't buy what it used to. In real world value, you got paid back in devalued dollars. That's because our government printed more dollars out of thin air. That's inflation. And that's how governments, including ours, quietly chip away at their national debt. Not by defaulting, not by making it disappear, just by slowly weakening it over time. So what about stablecoins? Let's talk about them for a second. Coins like USDC or USDT, Tether, they're basically digital dollars. They're backed by things like cash or short-term US Treasury bonds. And people use them around the world to trade, send money, or escape unstable currencies. So when someone in another country holds a stablecoin, and because of the new legislation, they're basically holding a digital IOU tied to the US dollar. And by extension, they're also tied to US debt. Now here's the key part. When inflation hits, now it's not just Americans feeling the pain anymore. Anyone holding a dollar-backed stablecoin gets hit too, no matter where they live. Make sense? Let me know in the comments if it doesn't. But let me be really clear about something. This isn't some secret trick to make our 37 trillion in debt go away. It's not a loophole, it's not a hack. It's just how global money works when the US dollar is being used around the world. Here's the reality. When the US government spends more than it brings in, it borrows money by issuing treasury bonds. And these days, a growing number of those bonds are held by companies that issue stablecoins, thanks to the recently passed Genius Act. Tether, Circle, the companies behind USDT and USDC, are now required to back their coins with US treasuries. It's a very clever strategy. So when people across the globe use stablecoins, they're basically holding a digital dollar that's backed by US debt. And when the dollar loses value due to inflation, everyone holding those coins is affected. That part is true. But again, it doesn't erase the debt. Keep in mind the US still has to make payments, still has to repay the principal. None of that goes away. What it does mean is that inflation gets spread around the world. Not just to Americans, but to anyone holding those digital dollars. So basically, inflation spreads and stablecoins let it reach more people worldwide. But spreading the pain isn't the same as erasing the 37 trillion debt. Okay, let's debunk the fantasy. Now that we've covered what's actually possible, let's talk about the parts of the theory that just flat out don't make sense. Claim number one. The US can move 37 trillion of debt into a crypto cloud. Okay, there is no crypto cloud where you can just upload debt and make it disappear. That's not a financial mechanism. That's just a buzzword with no meaning behind it. Debt is a legal contract. You can't just convert treasury bonds into Bitcoin or stablecoins like it's some kind of currency exchange. That's like saying you can pay off your mortgage by using a prepaid crypto debit card. See what I did there? Sounds technical and fancy, but it doesn't work that way. Claim number two. The US will sell all its gold and buy Bitcoin. This one comes mostly from Michael Saylor, the guy behind MicroStrategy. He suggested the US should dump gold and buy Bitcoin and create a Bitcoin strategic reserve. Now that's a bold opinion, but it's not a real plan. Yes, in March of 2025, Trump did sign an executive order creating something called the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve and Digital Asset Stockpile. But here's the important part. That reserve is mostly made up of Bitcoin the government already had from criminal and civil forfeitures. And the order specifically says those Bitcoins can't be sold. It's not a program to sell all our gold or go on a taxpayer-funded Bitcoin shopping spree. It's simply a way to manage the Bitcoin the US already owns. And do you honestly think the US government is going to put the world's reserve currency on something as unstable as Bitcoin? Claim number three. The US is secretly using private companies to stack crypto. So another version of this theory says the US is quietly using companies like MicroStrategy as a backdoor, secretly building a national Bitcoin reserve behind the scenes. Now, is that possible? Sure, the government has worked with private companies before, sometimes in ways that weren't obvious at first. A recent example is how the US ended up with a stake in Intel, something that caught a lot of people by surprise. But here's the thing. There's no hard evidence this is actually happening with Bitcoin. Companies like MicroStrategy are free to buy as much Bitcoin as they want, but that automatically doesn't mean the US is pulling the strings. So while it is an interesting idea, one you'll hear in crypto circles, for now it remains pure speculation. Here's what all those theories have in common. They sound technical, they use real financial terms, and they're sprinkled with just enough detail to feel, smart. But like Andrew Jick pointed out, if you take a step back and ask just a few basic questions, the whole thing kind of falls apart. It's not a real plan, it's a clever story, and stories like this don't solve a $37 trillion problem. What's the real plan? So if the US isn't secretly dumping its debt into the crypto cloud, what's actually happening? Well, the truth is a lot less dramatic, but way more important to understand. Here's the real playbook. The US manages its debt the same way it always has. It issues treasury bonds, it prints more dollars when needed, and it uses inflation to slowly reduce the real burden of what it owes. That's it. That's the oldest trick in the book, and for now, it works. Why? Because the US dollar is still the world's reserve currency. So where do stablecoins fit in? Coins like USDC and USDT, they're just digital dollars backed mostly by short-term treasuries. The more people around the world who use these digital dollars, the more demand there is for US debt and the dollar itself. And when inflation kicks in, that cost, the loss in purchasing power, doesn't just hit Americans anymore. It quietly spreads to anyone holding these stablecoins. That's the real dynamic. Not a conspiracy, not a backdoor reset, just the US exporting inflation more efficiently. So what's the takeaway? Could the US ever erase $37 trillion in debt with crypto? No, that's pure fantasy. But could it use inflation and the global reach of stablecoins to quietly spread the burden of that debt to the rest of the world? Yes, and honestly, it's already happening. It's not some hidden agenda, it's not a magic trick, it's just how the system works, when your currency is at the center of the global economy. So the next time you hear someone say the US is moving its debt into the crypto cloud, just remember, complexity doesn't mean it's true. In fact, sometimes the more complicated a theory sounds, the more likely it's not true. Let me know what you think in the comments. Can the US really erase its $37 trillion debt with crypto? And if you want to know what I think about Bitcoin, check out this video right up here. Thanks so much for watching, and see you in the next video.